right, welcome everyone. I'm Christian. I'm very excited today. I'm joined by Greg Tull of Monitogo Studios, not Montego Studios, as I read it in my head for years. And Greg of also Wandering Skies, a production or a feature that is currently in, I guess, would you say pre-production, Greg?
Pre-production, yeah.
And I'm also joined by Joshua Vennetti of Plastic Point Productions and Vennetti Animations, who's also working on a large-scale brick film, Saul of Tarsus. So very excited to be talking with some other brick filmers who are really exploring the limits of what can be done with brick filming. So one thing, but just to kind of kick us off, I thought it was kind of interesting. Our projects, everything that we're working on is actually pretty different, but we have a few things in common. We're all working on long-term brick film projects with fleshed out plots and character development. We have kind of larger, medium to larger teams of people, including carefully chosen voice actors and partners working with us. And what we're doing requires a massive commitment of time, energy, and money. So I guess to kick this off, I want to ask you guys, why would you do this? Why this particular style and venture, I guess?
Well, I started. Oh.
Yeah, you should take the jump. You just funded your Kickstarter for Solid.
Yeah, congrats, man. You rocked it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good job. Well done.
Thank you. So I started it when I was 12, which is, I mean, that's the only thing I knew back then, Lego brick filming. So that was the option. And it was going to be like a 3-minute video. And then it was like a 10-minute thing. And then now it's like 25 minutes. So I'd say that's why I'm doing it as a brick film is, I mean, I started it like that. It's just kept going. And of course, that's what I've been doing. So
It looks really good. Like it's one of the most professionally produced things that I've seen in this space. Probably period, but certainly recently, especially when it comes to long form, right? So like this is a question or a problem that we're all sort of confronting together to different degrees. And obviously, like, I did Bound, which was a feature, but when you're talking about doing something that's a long form project, it's an entirely different ballgame. Like every brick filmer knows that doing brick film period is a lengthy and complicated process, right? And it will really test your endurance. But then you talk about doing it long form, and that just multiplies like tenfold.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of bounce off that, Joshua, do you go by Josh or Joshua?
Joshua.
Gotcha. By the like that kind of clip, that a teased clip of Saul of Tarsus where it's following these children running along on this trail. I'm like, I watched it again today and it's just so such eye candy. The set is so good and the animation is great. So very excited to see how that plays out.
Thank you. Yeah.
How about you, Greg?
Yeah, thanks. So to answer your original question, so for me, I had an older brother that was involved in film when I was about 14. And I also wanted to get involved in film, but I grew up as a homeschool kid and I have 7 siblings. So the difficulty of getting
4 other siblings, homeschool. Yeah.
My goodness.
The difficulty of, being able to like get funding for doing live action film was very tedious, but like many homeschool families, we had Lego and we had a DSLR. And so I was like, I saw, years ago, some friends of mine, the Rondinas, did a short film called Wars of Humanity, which was Lego stop motion. And that was the first Lego stop motion I ever saw. I think I saw that when I was like 12 or 13. I was like, oh my gosh, like I could do this. I mean, I have time. And I've always been passionate about being a storyteller and about sharing truth wherever that's found. And so I thought I could have an avenue to tell stories that I'm passionate about and to share truth through these films, right? Because art is always speaking something to us, and it can speak truths, it can speak lies, it can speak encouragement, it can speak pessimism, like it can speak so many different things. And so I wanted to use it as a mechanism to sort of like breathe life. Now, I'll add the caveat that if what someone wants to do is like preach a sermon per se, then like go get a podcast or a pulpit. Film is a storytelling medium. So if you want to tell stories, then come to film to tell stories. If your point is like, I'm gonna like say this important message and what I'm doing, like, well, then wrong medium. That's not what the medium is for. And people expect certain things when they come to see a film in terms of what it's going to communicate to them. being a foundationally storytelling art form, if that makes sense. So that's what attracted me to the medium. And then Lego stop motion was just attainable, and it was something that I started working on, and then it ended up becoming a passion. And now I've been involved with it for merciful gracious 15 years, I think. I started Bound when I started my first animations when I was 13 or 14, and then I started Bound when I was 15, and then that went all the way to 21. And then I kind of took a break for a couple of years, just early on in the Coast Guard. I did some commercial work in there for the Lego Group and some other companies. Then Atlas, which was kind of a good growth piece for us, I guess, in terms of trying to push the cinematic lighting and things in production. And then just because I can't stop, I had to get for Wandering Skies, and here we are.
God, so many things I wanted to comment on. First was, I think it's funny what you said about can't stop, because there's like, I feel like for me there came a point where it was either I kind of give up. I felt internally like I had to give up brick filming, just kind of be like, okay, this is just kind of a now and then hobby kind of thing, or I had to dive into it and commit completely with my heart and soul. And I kind of like bounced back and forth for a while, but eventually I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to commit to this and like see what happens. And so there was a kind of conscious decision, but it was also interesting your epiphany when you were younger about, I can use this to tell whatever story I want to tell. I personally started as more of a Lego builder. I was really into the Flickr community of sharing your mocks and learning the techniques, the snot and all this stuff, studs not on top and all these crazy cool things, and obsessed with the Brothers Brick. And I remember at a young age having this realization, because I had a lot of Legos. It was the only gift that I asked from my parents. I realized that that I could truly build anything that I could visualize, anything I could visualize in my head, I could build. It seemed like it was almost like a feeding of the 5,000, where it's like the bricks, if I searched long enough, I'd find all the bricks required. And so that as I've grown has turned into I can do this with film. Like I can tell whatever story I want to tell. Lego is the medium that allows me to do that.
Yeah. It's something that I try to tell people, in which we have striven to do in Monitogo Studios from the jump. So again, for about 15 years for us, right, is paint is a medium to an artist. And you can use it like a 5-year-old playing with watercolors, right? Or you can use it like a 50-year-old who's been painting for 3.5 decades, who uses it as an elevated medium, right? There's a difference between, like, it's the same base medium that if I paint a picture that goes on their parents' fridge and that's on the roof of the Sistine Chapel. So if you can remove the idea that Lego is a toy for kids to play with, and I think more of that is developing in the general culture at large, and then you say it's just a medium. It's a medium, and I can use it as an art form and elevate it to whatever degree I have the capability to. Then all of a sudden you're like, well, why not make cinema with this?
Yeah, I listened to your kind of interview with your production team regarding Wandering Skies, and you made a comment that I wrote down because I thought it was excellent. It was, there's no reason, you can't make your own. You realize there is no reason you can't make your own version of the Sistine Chapel, like in brick film form. Art is a medium, brick filming is a medium, and it seems we have seen some incredibly ambitious projects. I mean, Bound is a really good example of one that really was something that hadn't really been seen before. There have been some historically massive brick films that kind of blew everybody's minds, but it's not a common thing. So there seems to be a lot of potential in what we can do with enough ambition, time, and patience.
And resources.
And resources, yeah. So we've discussed, kind of scratched the surface of your brick filming journeys. But Joshua, I'd like to ask you specifically. I kind of browsed through your channel, and you actually have some videos that I had seen that I did not know you had made. One was, Seasons Change. I think that was a THAC entry, perhaps. But I remember seeing that when it came out, and like kind of blew me away, and also like made me very sad. But that's what it was supposed to do.
I'd say that was my only entry that I literally went all out. Like, me and my brothers were working on it. We just had people building while we were script writing. Like, we were nonstop for 24 hours. It's draining. You take a couple of days after that to like get your energy back. But
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you have to, I feel like it's one of those contests where I only did it once and it was this year. And I thought
Okay.
about doing it before, but I was like, I'd always thought when I do this, I'm gonna go all out. And you can only go all out so often, you know.
Yeah.
But Joshua, if you could tell me a little bit about kind of your brick filming journey and what led to the desire to make a large project like Saul of Tarsus.
Yeah. So when I first started, I don't know when it actually started because it was like we had camcorders and we would do the click, click, and you get a frame every second. And I started that probably at like 7 years old. So like, I don't know if that's where it started or because then there's this software called Hue Animation, and I got that at like 9 or 10 or something like that. And I don't know if you saw the Jesus Walks on Water.
That's one of your most viewed videos, or it's at least up there. I did watch it, and it's
yeah. So
it
I
is
made
fun
that
to watch the growth.
or something like that. And obviously it wasn't great, but I just kind of merged into it. It wasn't like, okay, I'm now going to start making brick films. Over the weekend, we sometimes pull up the camcorder and just make a little something, a little robbery or something or another. So it started as that, and then I joined Bricks in Motion. It's kind of in the community, posting little brick films, and then I'd say when it actually got bigger is when I made the pirate thing for the Lego idea set, and I did that on my bedroom floor, which didn't even have like a table or anything yet. And I was still doing it. And after that, it was like, wait, I can actually make some good stuff. And then we built the table, cleaned out the garage. Now that's where I work. But like it was totally just fun until then, which was like 3 or 4 years ago. And then we were like, let's do something. We're Christians. I love Jesus. I want to share that. And we were thinking what would be a story we could tell. And this was at like 12 or 13 is when the idea was coming. What could be a story that we could tell that's like everyone knows, like the crucifixion. There's brick films out there, a lot of films, Genesis story, anything like that. Like it was all out there. So we really scanned the Bible and we're like, Paul's life is not really, I mean, there's a couple of films of Paul, but then we got into Saul or his earlier years, and it was like, he's really not, there's not like anything out there about that. So then, and of course it was a very underdeveloped idea. I didn't even know how to write a screenplay back then. So I went on Discord and was in screenwriting channels, and we got some people together. There was a film student that really helped. And eventually the script came together and developed, and all of a sudden I had a 25-minute film on my hands. And we ran a first Kickstarter like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, got like 1,600. That kicked me into gear. We bought a lot of Legos period. And then we're coming along. I'm talking with composers, Guatemala with the face animation. And then it was like, we're going to need more money. So, and it's still more than what we raised. Like it's expensive. It's a pretty expensive 25-minute film, but yeah, that's how it happened. It was just very and I've always loved storytelling, making films. Like every brick film I made, I would try to make it better than the last one. Like I was always looking at that, like, okay, now I'll do this and this, and my cinematography especially really improved over the last.
It was really interesting browsing through your channel because, and I don't know if you had animated things that you didn't upload or that you took down, but it seemed like there aren't. The progression seems to happen pretty quickly, just like your growth in animation. It's like I watched a video from like 3 years ago and I'm like, oh, well, that's easy, like definitely like learning some things. And it's like 2 years ago, it's like, he's pretty good. And it's like 2 or 3 videos later, like from this year, and it's like, this is completely different. I don't even recognize the creator. Like
I haven't made, I mean, it's like Saul of Tarsus is developing. I made the Thack Seasons Change, but I haven't really made much. I worked on an Agent Stout film, a live action film. And that was like, I've been working on Saul of Tarsus. You kind of need little creative breaks, like taking a small time away from a big project like Saul of Tarsus, because it can get really like you lose your vision for the project. So that was kind of my break. It took longer than expected because the visual effects took a while. But anyway, that was like December to July this year. So that was a break. And then I hit Saul of Tarsus again, like full force.
Hmm.
And now I'm really going at it. So
it's interesting what I can definitely relate on that end where you need a break. I've been working on this my own feature-length film, The Void War: Gray Horizons, for probably over 2 years now, and the
Hux,
it's a little maddening because you get, you're a year down the road and you haven't created a finished product in months and months and months, and you like kind of forget what it feels like to finish a product. So that's why it felt kind of good this year to just take a break from the animation and enter Brawl, because I could actually finish an animation, publish it, have this finished work. And I was like, this is kind of a foreign feeling now. This animating the movie has become more of a lifestyle than a project I'm working on. It's just something that I do every day.
There was something I wanted to jump back on for a second that Joshua brought up. And Joshua, I'm curious to know at this point, you're talking about a 25-minute film in a high level of production for brick film. Now with your more educated experience on the project so far, any idea of what the estimate of the actual cost to produce it will be? And I'm cash out the door, not what it would be worth to produce, but like what you're actually going to spend on it.
I'd say about 15,000.
Okay, that's pretty good. Pretty good. So we spent 65,000 on Bound. That was cash out the door. Like it's. And bear in mind that entire time, like we weren't paying ourselves, we weren't paying most of our team members, right? We were like living poor, working part-time jobs, and then Bound was like our full-time job that we would go do. And of course, I was 15 when I started, so I was still like doing high school and stuff on the side. But yeah, it's just, that's a very real thing that I wanted to point out in this process. Like if you're going to do something that's long form, you can expect that it will cost you money, that or an inordinate amount of time. And I mean, Bound still took 6 years as it was, right? So I think there's 36,000 final frames in that film. And, we basically animated on it for 4 years, just animation. And that didn't include pre-production, post, visual effects, composing, etc. So that's just like, I think that's a fair thing to put out there for people in terms of setting an expectation. Like one or two things is going to happen. One, you're going to have to spend some real money on it to produce it. And or it's going to take you forever. And to be honest, if you don't spend some money on it, personally, I don't think that it's going to happen. Here's the reason that I say that. Brick film is monstrously tedious to produce, as I'm sure like you guys know, and I'm sure like the audience watching this will probably know the same thing. So if it's hard enough to produce something for say Brawl, which is like a week, right? You're not talking about years. And Christian, you talked about this, right? It's psychologically difficult to keep working on something over and over again. And you're like, I haven't finished. There's no win yet. Like I'm just in the process somewhere of making this. So again, Bound was 6 years, Atlas was 14 months. These things do take a long time, but I think people should just kind of settle into that reality of like, you should anticipate that you're going to spend some money on it along the way, because otherwise it becomes like this almost impossible hurdle to cross. Yeah. Psychologically, like it would just drain the life out of you if you can't
something else that really is like, as I've been working on it, like my animation is getting better, my cinematography is better. So like I look at a scene I did like 2 years ago, and I'm like, this is not going to work. So like I've actually had to pull some scenes out and I'm reanimating because
don't do it.
Yeah. And how old were you again, Joshua, when you started animation of Saul of Tarsus?
Say that again.
How old were you when you started the animation of Saul of Tarsus?
I'd say the end of 13.
Okay. It's interesting, and I totally hear what you're saying, Greg. And I think it's actually very important advice for anybody who's like, I want to make a feature length film, because it's something else. And we're pretty weird for pursuing it, if you ask me, but it's, let's see, which direction do I want to go with this? I guess for me personally, I would just say, just make the thing, make whatever you can and go from there. When I made my original series, the Lego Zombie Apocalypse, like, my young teenage mind was like, this is going to be the coolest thing I've ever made. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. And then I produced it. And now looking back, I'm like, I had to do it. I had to make this kind of a silly, fun ride that people happen to like. But it was foundational for me learning and developing a consistency of skill. And even the second season, I was like, okay, now I'm good at animation. So now I'll make this thing that's actually really good. It's like, there's obviously a lot of learning that happened there. So now I'm telling myself that this third movie it's going to be my magnum opus, but it's like, it'll still be a learning process. And now I do feel like personally my animation skill is consistent enough to where hopefully I won't have to go back and reanimate anything. But there is also just something to be said about just make the thing and then make something after if you can. But obviously it gets complicated with real life responsibilities and trying to fund, productions like this as an adult.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But to your point, Christian, like just start.
Yeah.
Just start and then don't stop. Like, and then one day you'll be like, oh my gosh, 6 years later, we're done. Like,
yeah. That's exactly right. I have an interesting, I guess, maybe observation or question I'm kind of curious about. Obviously, both of you come from Christian backgrounds, and Bound was kind of, it has a Christian message, and obviously Saul of Tarsus has that as well. Do you think that when I approach my movie, there is almost, for lack of a better word, it's almost become a religious pursuit for me, where it's like this thing that it's just every cell in my body is committed to it. Would you say that is something that gives you the fire to kind of not stop, where other people might kind of just get bored of it?
Yeah. So I would say that the short answer to your question is yes. So I'm also a Christian. This is probably no surprise from the things that I've produced before. And let's call it my foundational objective in life, right, is to share the truth, and not just the truth of the gospel, but other elements, truth wherever it is to be found. And I can do that more effectively through a wide-reaching medium like film than just in, say, individual conversation. And so, and then, like, if you read the New Testament, Jesus also often talks to people in parables, and that's one way in which he is speaking truth to people in a way that's relatable and understandable to people, even if they don't have all the same background, not like Jesus came from, the religious experience of the Jews or something like that. So yes, I would say that is certainly a propellant for me, because what that does is sort of undergirds and provides purpose to my life as a whole. So it's not just something that I'm doing because I personally want to do it. It's something that I'm doing because I have a drive that exists outside of myself that sort of undergirds my efforts.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And maybe people are getting more philosophy than they signed up for by listening to this, but certainly in making my own series too, I have my own beliefs of, what is good and what is right and what is worth pursuing. And there are moments in my own series where I'm like, okay, I got a little preachy there. And it was interesting, Greg, what you said earlier about how like storytelling is not intended for preaching. You're telling a story. I think there is a fine line between, obviously we all have messages we want to share and spread, but kind of treading the line of how do I basically kind of let the viewer think about this through the medium of a story and take them along on these characters' journey, rather than just be like, this is the message, this is what you should believe. And that's something that I think is where good storytelling is really developed, or where you see it, how you can tell the difference.
All right, I'll just interject super quick here, because I feel like this is worth saying, Josh, before you take this. Like Bound is a poor example of how to integrate that well. So I'll just absolutely raise my hand and say that I don't think it takes away from the validity of the message, but it does. It's poorly presented in that film. I mean, first of all, I wrote it when I was like 15, and so there's much to be desired. And there were some ways in which I felt cornered into presenting it in the film. And so it was certainly forced to a degree. So I tried to make it as organic to the story as I could within the context. But like that film is it's lacking in so many ways, and I'm acutely aware of that. So before somebody wants to jump on my back and be like, yeah, well, you did a really bad example of that in Bound, I'm like, yes, I did. Trying to get better.
Yeah, I think we all have to forgive ourselves for the things we started when we were preteens, but that's how we grow.
Joshua, what about you? Do you feel like it gives you a different drive or a different level of drive?
I'd say I've gone through many different stages of it. So when I first started, I was wanting to make the best thing I had made. And then it kind of developed into it was small, and I wanted to make it a great small thing. Like it was just going to be the scene of him meeting Jesus. And then as I developed into it, it's been more. I had this drive that was definitely beyond like what you said, and then it kind of died out. It died out about a year ago, and I was like spending a lot of time on it. And I think I was not being productive enough with it. Like I had kind of a bad thing going, which was really hard. And then the Agent Stout that I did, like, was such a needed break from it because it had been like 2 years. And that was the project I had worked on. Like I didn't have any. I did a couple little freelance things where I made like a 1 minute Lego animation, and it was like those, like you need those little breaks. And now that I'm coming back into it, like it's definitely, I have this drive that's
renewed.
Yes, it's very it's many reasons. So I've been in a hot garage on this film, no AC. And when you're out there 12 hours a day, you really lose physical energy and then the drive. So like I was having throughout the summer as I'm animating, like the little kid scene and everything, like I felt like I was at a peak quality level with what I was doing. But I had the Monitogo rig for the motion control unit. Don't know if you saw that, but I had that for like a month or so. And like every day I was out there 12, 14, 16 hours, like getting in as much animation as I could with it. And then like at the end, I totally crashed. So I wouldn't say I have a consistent drive, but I get a drive and then I'm down, and after a little bit, then I'm up down but I just got an AC a week ago. So.
Nice. That's a game changer.
If I can interject something real quick.
Okay.
Joshua, this is not an attempt to dad you, I promise, but I mean, I am a dad now, so maybe I'm doing it, but just from a guy who is terrible at this, okay? Like I raise my hand first and foremost and say I'm terrible at this. Make sure that you pace yourself, because you can't drive at an unsustainable pace without burning yourself out. Depending on how hard you burn yourself out, that can be a very hard thing to come back from, right? So that's just my encouragement to you, man.
I think I've been doing that a little bit.
Pick yourself along the way, because you drive too hard and then you'll be like, I can't do this anymore. 100% you can't do this, right? And then it's hard to come back from something that if you dig yourself too deep of a hole, it's real hard to climb out of. So, make sure you balance the other parts of your life, this process. And Christian, I don't know if you're good at this or not. So, but that would just be my encouragement to you as a guy who's terrible at balancing things. Like, I'm just like, yeah, 100%. And then people are like, you're really out of whack. Like, you need to take a break from this or something, right? And then so that's my encouragement, is like set a sustainable pace for yourself. You're gonna a person can go way further by walking than they can by sprinting, right? You can sprint and you'll get 100 yards done really fast, but you're not going to be able to run a mile at a sprint. But you can walk, and you can walk 20 or 30 miles in a day.
That's sage advice, Greg. I think it's we're all unique individuals when we have our own struggles. I know personally, like, obviously we're all doing very ambitious projects. When I sit down to animate, sometimes the hardest thing is just getting started. Actually, every time the hardest thing is just getting started. It's crazy how once you just start animating the scene, you get in the zone. But for me, it's the start. Like, I'll reach the end of a scene and now I've developed this nasty habit of, all right, now I deserve some dopamine. So I'll just like flip open a game on my computer and game for about, 20 minutes. And then like, okay, now I'll animate a new scene. And it's tricky. And it's a weird kind of relationship with myself, where there are days where it's like, I know I could have done better today. But I deserve some rest too. But do you though? Do you really need that rest? I mean, where is your energy coming from? And it's an interesting introspective journey, trying to take this thing that is in your brain and put it out there in the world, and like trying to justify, how much time should I put onto it? How much money should I pour into it? Should I make this my life's work? Is that proper? It's a really fascinating journey. Super pumped to be on it, but it's certainly an interesting thing to embark on.
Yeah. So not only for me, it's like getting a project done, it's like awesome. You're like, okay, that's out, and you can publish it, get some results or whatever. But not only am I not getting projects done, the scenes are taking a long time. So like I'm having trouble getting scenes done, and that's even worse because then I'm like, yes, I have a scene done. After like that's what a project should have been, the scene, and then I'll get that. So that definitely makes it difficult to keep the drive. And usually after a scene, I'll have a drop because like I push for the scene, and finally the scene done. And it can be a long time to get the scene done. So that's become a problem.
Yeah, I guess I should also specify. I probably use the word scene improperly there. I was referring to a single shot where it's like start from one angle and end at that angle.
Yeah.
Finishing scenes, that's something. How do you guys? I guess now we can maybe talk a little technical. And Greg, I know you have written or most of the, I think a lot of the writing is done or character development established for Wandering Skies, but do you guys have a certain way that you tend to break up scenes? Or I'd love to hear a little bit about the way you structure the creative process from idea conception to like final editing and publishing.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of talk you through our overall process here. And Joshua, sorry, I'm not sure what your current team size is, so I don't know how much of this you have to incorporate, so feel free to interject. Bravo. Yeah, I will say this, guys, if you can find some teammates to bring on board, like, do it. Absolutely, right? Like, there's actually this kind of proverb or this wisdom from the scriptures that talks about, like, if a man is walking alone on a road and he falls down and injures himself, like, who will be there to pick him up again? But if two are walking down the road together and one of them falls and injures himself, the other can carry his brother. And then scripture also goes on to talk about how a threefold cord is not easily broken, right? So like one strand of rope, you can snap, it's not that hard. You think like a single stick, you can break a single stick pretty easily. You have a whole bundle of sticks, it's incredibly hard to break that bundle of sticks. And so they support each other. So that's just a little encouragement I would give to you guys is if you can try and build a team around yourself, at least a couple of other people that even if they're not as involved in the production as you, they're also like passionate and supportive about the project, because that will help a lot when you have those bad days or those down times. Okay, so sorry, I keep like dipping over into I don't know if it's wisdom, it's maybe like experience gained by past folly. Anyway, so
keep it coming.
Yeah, our process kind of works like this, right? And so what we've always done is we've always sat down, we've done all of our writing first. So like on Wandering Skies, I actively started a writer's room in Los Angeles about 2.5 years ago. So I flew out there, I brought on John Fornoff, who's been writing for like 30 years. I mean, the man has like 200 plus radio dramas to his name. He worked on the Adventures in Odyssey series for some time. He's written multiple films and TV shows. He's a brilliant writer, and he's really, really sage is the best way to put it, right? And so he has all that experience he's bringing to the table. So he came on the team, and then I brought on 2 other writers. I have a brother-in-law who's a filmmaker, and then now the lead writer of the show, Grace Kidman, right? So you have those 4 perspectives. And all that we did was we just rented an Airbnb in Los Angeles, and we just like ate, slept, and breathed Wandering Skies for a week. And so we just carved out that world. Like I came with an idea, right? But then we were like, who are these characters? What do they want? What are these cultures like? What does this world consist of? Like we decided a lot of like the foundational elements of the world, what it meant, what the cultures were, how they operated, what kind of modern historic cultures inspired them, and then kind of answering those fundamental Pixar questions, right? Of like, here's our character. They're in this world that they're used to, but their world isn't right. It needs to be better, but they don't want to get out of their imperfect world because they're comfortable where they are. So then you have to have a catalyst that forces that character out of their comfort zone. So Finding Nemo is a perfect example of this, right? Like Marlin is in this world where he's comfortable, but he's overprotective of his son. And that overprotectiveness of his son is suffocating his son, right? Like it's too much. So if there's a kind of a log line, maybe you could take away from Finding Nemo, it's if you truly love someone, you have to learn to let them go. And that's what Marlon has to learn about Nemo. And so then he goes through this film trying to get his son back, right? He's trying to get back to this world. But Marlon grows as a character throughout the process of the film. So by the time the film ends, Marlon is a better fish and father, a better father fish, a better father fishier than he was at the beginning of the movie, right? So he gets Nemo back, but now he's not suffocating his son anymore. So he's grown. He's gone back to the world that he started in, but the world's not the same anymore because Marlin's not the same anymore. And that's the same thing where I was trying to answer in our writing. It's ultimately like the hero's journey, right? Who is this character? What is wrong with their world? What upsets the balance in the world they have? And then the story is them fighting to get back there, except when they get back, it's not the same. It's better now. So we have to answer those questions. Once we've established what the story is. So for Wandering Skies, we've actually mapped out 4 seasons of this. And we were inspired by DiMartino and Kenitsuko writing Avatar: The Last Airbender because they did the same thing. They mapped out 3 seasons of that show from start to finish. They knew the whole story arc, the story arcs of each season, and then the arcs of the individual episodes, or maybe an arc that like travel over 2 episodes or something. We did the same thing because you'll see in shows where they'll be developed, and then the first season is maybe good, and then they come to a second season, but they didn't know if they're going to write a second season, and so you're like, wow, this is really stitched together, and it feels like it. So now you've like created Frankenstein's monster, and it's not like it's alive, but it's not great, and that's what we wanted to actively avoid doing. Once we've established a story, then Wandering Skies, because it's a fantasy world that we're creating, I shouldn't say fantasy, it's a steampunk world, but it's a fictional steampunk world. So there's so much more work you have to do when you're creating a fictional world, because you have to say like, oh, there's a technology that our airships fly by. What is that? How does it work? What are the rules about it? Because if you can't maintain the rules of your own world, no one will believe it. So you have to say, what are the rules of this technology? What are the limitations? How does it functionally work? Even if it couldn't work in our world, how does it work in my world? Then you have to follow those rules. You don't get to break your own rules once you establish them. So there's been a lot of world development that's been a huge part of Wandering Skies, just in terms of what it visually looks like, how technologies operate, how cultures operate and interact with each other. Once that is established, then we storyboard everything. Like, you cannot afford to not storyboard stop motion animation. The process, or any animation for that matter, like Pixar does this religiously, and I'm going to keep pointing to them as an example. All right, I'm like a little Pixar disciple. In fact, I actually just met Angus McLean yesterday, which was like super awesome highlight. Director of Lightyear and longtime Pixar employee, if you don't know. So, but if you study Pixar's process, part of what they do is they are constantly storyboarding and re-storyboarding their films. And what that does is that's a low cost way to create a movie. Storyboarding. It doesn't take that much to draw sketches and then to play with those sketches and ask whether or not your timing and your character and presentation is correct. Because if it's wrong, oh, what? I drew on a 3x5 card and it took me 10 minutes? Like, okay, I'll throw it away and make another one. But animation, right? That might be a 5-second shot. Well, then if I sat down to animate that, that's hours of time potentially. So you don't want to expend hours of time when you could have answered that in 5 or 10 minutes of sketching. Once we finish the storyboarding process, then I now do animatics for everything. So I take those storyboards, I take rough audio from whatever the screenplay is for a particular scene, and I actually edit it. I put in temp music. Sometimes I put in like some temp key sounds. And bear in mind, this is a very crude version of the film, but it allows you to feel out the time. It allows you to start feeling out the timing of the scene that you're creating. And so you start to get this feel of like, okay, this is too long, this is too short, like maybe I could cut out these 3 shots, or I'm not taking enough time here to let my composer do his best work, right? So like that's something you have to think about when you're timing, is this is a moment where, and like if you work with a good sound designer, a good composer, particularly if you can bring them in earlier on the process, a sound designer can tell you invaluable things. And I've been using Nathan Ashton for years, he's awesome. And he'll tell you something like, hey, if you gave me 3 or 4 close-ups right here, I could give you some sick sound design. But if you don't give me those close-ups, I don't have the opportunity to give you the most impactful sound design. So you're trying to think about that in your editing process. And that editing process is starting all the way back at storyboarding and editing your animatics. And so then I can send that to my composer and be like, hey, what do you think? Like, how's this timing? And he might be like, that's good, I have enough space to work. Or he might ask for 10 or 15 more seconds in a scene. Because ultimately, like if I'm just watching it as an editor, something might feel too long to me. And then I could send it to my composer. He's like, you're not giving me enough time to work. I need another 15 or 20 seconds here, because if you gave that to me, I could then make this 3 times as impactful with the music. So that's where it becomes, obviously it film's a massively collaborative process in that sense. Once our animatics are locked in, then I produce shot lists for the entire scene. This is the shot, this is approximately how many frames it is from the animatic. I provide some basic composition rules to my animators. I tell them, like, here's the line or the part of a line that's in this shot. Here's generally how I expect this character to be interacting, because your animator is also the actor, right? Like that's another layer of complexity in doing stop motion animation. Is the character needs to look sad, happy, angry, whatever it is. Like your animator has to imbue that emotion into the character, so they need to know that. And the animatic is a critical tool in communicating that to them, along with the shot list. Like shot 89 from scene 3 is approximately 120 frames. It's a medium shot on these two characters. This is what this character is saying. This is basically how they're acting. Then my animators can actually produce that shot. And then what I'm doing, like Atlas was created this way, is I'm basically just taking these rough shots that are now animated, and I'm just dropping them into the animatic on top of the original frames. Granted, sometimes that timing changes, right? Because when you get into animation, I might think that something's going to be a 4-second shot, but then when the animator's doing it, you're kind of dealing with that natural flow of the character. Maybe it's 3 seconds, maybe it's 5, like it just depends. So the timing will change, but by and large, I'm then just dropping those things in on my animatic. And your sound designer and your composer have already had input on the process from way back when. So then I'm giving them something that they're like, yeah, I know exactly what to do in this space, right? To make it more impactful, to producing this more cinematic. And then you go into the post-production process. And one day you end up with a finished film. So there you go. That's kind of like our general process in terms of how we start with an idea and then get all the way through production.
And I would encourage any brick filmer, if you're watching, like, even if like most of you don't have other animators you're working with, you're probably just doing it by yourself, but it's the animatics are worth it, whether it's a 1-minute brick film or a 50-minute brick film. Like, it's a tiny bit of time, and then you already have it edited. So some people just like move their webcam around and whatever, but if you at least storyboard, but animatics don't take much more time, and then you know what you're doing, and it will turn out much better in a story. Like your story will make a lot more sense with the flow of it. So yeah,
absolutely. Well, on that note, well, first off, 5-star answer, Greg. That was fantastic. Really good insight into, you know, the higher levels of brick filming and what it takes, you know, if you really want to create something of really pristine quality. But Joshua, I am curious about, I know you're a smaller to a solo team outside, of course. I think, you know, you hired a composer and someone to edit the faces. So
yeah, we're going to have some people post, but production is just.
Yeah. So could you tell me a little bit about your approach and process to, I guess, in general, and if it's changed to Saul of Tarsus?
So when I started, I was an immature brick filmer, and I think I thought I was going to step it up, and I was storyboarding at this when I was first animating. That was it. So we had the script and the storyboard, but I would animate without scratch audio. So like, I don't know what I was thinking, but you animate it, and yeah. So now obviously I storyboard it, make shot lists, you do the animatic, get your timing all worked out. I don't have like sound designers and all that. I'm going to start working with the composer, but I've already animated some. So I'm going to start sending him animatics before I animate, and we're starting to get things rolling with that. But like, it's basically all on me. So like, I have the vision, and I don't have to get that vision to click with anyone else because I'm the only one doing it. So I don't need to do quite as much as far as like, but I definitely make the animatics, storyboards and all that. So you literally have your film in front of you before you start animating.
I did watch, Greg, your video on your, again, with your production team, but I guess who would you guys say are your biggest supporters and co-creators, if you had to list one or two, who are just there helping you make this a reality? Is there anybody you'd like to, I guess, shout out in this interview?
When I was writing the script, I said this before, I had a couple brick filmers actually from Bricks in Motion, kind of like reading over the script, but then I had another screenwriter that's a student at a film school, and that developed the screenplay and definitely brought the film more reality, as I didn't really know how to write a script prior. And then as we've continued, I mean, it's me My family backs me up. I do have some connections with, like, I know me and Barry Cook, he directed, like, I've done a little stuff with him. We filmed that agent film on his property. We know each other, and he's read the script, given a little input. So, and that has a couple more connections. I'm actually at a studio for doing visual effects for another film, and the people there, they're like Disney hand-drawn animators, some of them, and they've given some input into the film, but that's about it. So I get a little insight from them on things. I'm seeing the right way to do production, pre-production, and all that at that studio, because obviously they know what they're doing. So that's kind of encouraging to see that. And then it's just me, pretty much. And Sebastian, the composer for the project, he's starting to be a pretty good second person on it, helping out with, like, just encouragement and whatever, a little vision. So
Yeah, that's awesome. How about Greg? Anybody that you'd like to?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now there's 5 people on the Winery Skies core team, and those 5 people are Stephen Erickson, and then Graham, Gareth, and Grace, who are all siblings. And so Graham and Gareth are both designers and builders, and then Grace is now the lead writer for the show. And the person I would really give a shout out to is actually Grace on this project. So Bound was created in partnership with my sister Monica, who since married, 2 kids, she runs her own graphic design business. She's no longer involved with the studio. We left on good terms, everyone, just kidding. But Grace is really, she's really, like, perhaps the most key partner in this process. First of all, she's been there from the jump. She was there at the writer's room in Los Angeles, July of 2020, June or July of 2020. And she's now the lead writer for the show, and she also does some design and project management as well. So, I mean, Grace is, like, in fact, as far as the story goes, it's probably even more Grace's story than it is mine at this point. So I'm kind of handling, like, broader production responsibilities, but in terms of, like, who really knows all the core elements of what the story is and who the characters are, that's Grace. And the amount of time and effort that she's invested into this is astounding. So she is the one that's ultimately writing at its core something that makes any of this worth making, right? Which is the story. Like, if you don't have a good story, what are you doing? So film is a storytelling, guys. So, like, if you don't have a good story to tell, don't make a film.
Write that down, guys. Write that down.
So do that first. Get a good story that people, that's worth telling. It's way too much work to make a film for a story that's not worth telling. So that's Grace, really, right now, in terms of, like, co-creator that's just been really faithful throughout the process so far. And bear in mind, at this point in Wandering Skies, like, people aren't really getting paid. We're all working towards something that we hope will be financially viable down the road. But until the season gets funded, they're not. So kudos to them for believing in it and being willing to come along with crazy old me on trying to develop something.
Yeah, well, and that's another one of the reasons that I was so eager to talk to both of you, is that what we're doing is unconventional in a lot of senses, including the sense of making something that has universal appeal and is easily funded, picked up by a production company, whatever it may be. It's kind of a leap of faith to just be like, hey, I'm going to dedicate a massive portion of my life to make this a reality, this particular brick filming story that I want to tell. And so I thought that was, it made me very curious as to what your kind of inspirations and passions were around your project. I had a kind of, I didn't go to LA and have a writer's room to the extent that you did, but I also, I paired up with people who had been involved in my previous seasons, and I was like, all right, guys, let's make this story. Who are our characters? Where do we want to go? And it was, a few days of just doing that. And we actually held, for the first time in my life, I held auditions for voice acting. And that was a very interesting process of reaching out to local theater communities, having my friends reach out to their circles of, a couple of them are pretty involved in community theater. And I actually got our high school choir teacher to let us host auditions in our old high school choir classroom. So we didn't have to pay, $200 to rent out a space or something. So how did you guys approach hiring voice actors? Or I guess, I don't know, Greg, have you gotten to that stage yet, or is it still kind of in the constructing the story? I don't know if you've done the casting yet.
Yeah, so in Bound, yeah, it was all volunteers. It was like family or friends. Micah was actually voiced by a random construction worker that walked into the studio one day. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have a great voice. So that happened. And then in Atlas, all three of the actors for Atlas are friends of mine who are professional actors. And so I actually reached out to them because I particularly wanted to tap them for those roles. And then I paid them for their time on that project. And then we are not yet to really the casting stage yet for Wandering Skies. We have some ideas of who we would like in some specific roles, but we will be holding open auditions for Wandering Skies.
Awesome. How about you, Joshua?
This is unique. Okay. So I was 13. We didn't even have a script yet. I don't think. Maybe, I mean, it was developing. And I just decided that I would reach out to people. And I just sent like, I don't know, 100 messages to like real actors. And then we started getting responses. And of course, I didn't have like a budget at all. So Saul is voiced by Daniel Ammerman, and he just happened to get back to me. And he did it for really cheap. And he's been in like The Office and a bunch of other stuff. And then we have the guy voicing Jesus is John Moore, and he narrated, I forget which Bible it was, but he's doing it for free, volunteering. There's a professional singer or whatever. He's doing the high priest, doing it for free, just helping out. We had an Emmy award-winning voice actor who did it for free, and even had his whole family like voice little roles, which was pretty crazy. So it was pretty wild. Not recommended, although go for it. Yeah. And I went back and looked at it, and like my messages had typos and the grammar was off. And I think that might have actually helped because I came across as young and they were going to help out or something. I don't know. But anyway, that worked out, and we actually got some real actors.
I applaud your ambition.
Yeah. That's it. It's interesting because obviously you started this very young, and it's even me. I'm now 26, and I hate asking people for anything. And whether it's, asking my choir teacher if I can use her classroom for my own little personal project, or asking local, professors, hey, would you share this information to your theater community? Even now, reaching out to fellow brick filmers and just being like, hey, would you help me get the word out on this project? It's like, doesn't feel right. And, there may be, there's a better way to approach that, become a part of a community and then make it a community event. But even fundraising, you're literally, I sent direct messages to family and friends being like, hey, would you give me your money basically to to make this a reality? And it's not necessarily easy, but if you don't ask, you can't get it. If you don't ask, it'll never happen. Obviously, that was an excellent move on your end, because I listened to some of the teasers. The voice acting sounds phenomenal.
Yeah, and I posted the teaser and I started getting critique. Like, he said annihilate, like he wasn't actually killing them. And I'm very concerned because like I wrote the screenplay when I was like 13, and if people are gonna pick apart the lines like that. So yeah, and I'm actually gonna reach it back out to them and see if we can, because there's some rewriting I want to do that pulls the story more into the story. Like, it goes a little bit out there, like that's not needed, and we could actually swap it out for this. So hopefully that works out, and they're not like, all right, $10,000 for 3 scenes or whatever. But yeah, but I definitely, I have this, I wouldn't call it a problem, but it doesn't hurt to ask. It's what I always like. So I'm always asking pretty big things for a lot of stuff, whether it's, I reached out to a guy who did sound design on Lord of the Rings recently. We'll see what happens with that. You never know. It doesn't hurt to ask. That's what I do. So
yeah.
I was going to say, Joshua, if you need some help when it comes to voice actors, I have have some connections to some other voice actors, including a couple guys that are one in particular who's a good friend of mine and is a well-established. He actually does a lot of like radio drama and like characters in I guess like embellished audiobooks is probably the best way to put it. It's like when characters are being voiced by different actors and things for the roles throughout the books. Like living audiobooks, I guess they call them. So if you need some connections like that, shoot me an email and I can try to hook you up if you need some other roles. But, yeah.
Look at that networking happening in real time, guys. I guess one other thing that I wanted to kind of ask you guys, and I know Joshua, we talked about your literal burnout in your very hot garage, but I'm curious. I want to know what both of your highs and lows look like and feel like. If doubts hit you, what those doubts feel like, and how do you approach them? What do you do when particular doubts kind of strike your mind? And if you want to share what they are, that's awesome. But I guess just love to hear your insight on that.
So I definitely hit like when I get excited about a project, I can't think about anything else. So like one time, like my mind is running and I'm like, oh, we can do this or that. And then I can't stop. And it gets a little unhealthy and you have to watch that. So I'd say the problem with being on a long-term project is that slowly dies out. You lose it and you need to refine it. And I find the best way to refine it is actually take a little break and work on a different creative project, much smaller. And then you can still, I'm always being creative. So like, I always want to be working on something creative, but when you don't have the vision for something, then you can't really be at that peak creative point. So I take a small little break, do something creative, small. I can check it off, say I actually did a project, and then I'll come back to it and try and find that. And going on vacation helps. Spend a week in the mountains or something like that.
Yeah, it's amazing even what going for a walk can do. Like we're so we got stuff going on all the time. Going for a walk and just like being in silence and just letting your mind kind of run or think about your story. It's made a tremendous difference for me sometimes. And just I'll come back from my walk and I'm like, all right, let's do this thing.
So what I'll do then is because Wandering Skies isn't my first rodeo, I'll talk about it on different projects. First, I'll talk about it on Bound, which was 6 years, and I definitely faced burnout at more than one point in Bound. Just my kind of personality, I'm the sort of person that is very resistant to say like negative thought patterns or depression. But my father actually thinks I might have gotten depressed working on Bound. I mean, it was so long. I started when I was 15. I thought it would take 2 years. Just kidding, it took 6. And I'm 15. I'm like, I'll finish this when I'm 17. Like, it's not that big a deal, And then here I am, a 19, 20, 21-year-old, and I'm still producing a brick film. And my buddies are out there like going on adventures or buying trucks or whatever else young guys are doing, you know what I mean? And I'm in my basement day after day, like plugging away on this thing. So for me, one of the things that I actually do is, I make my unreasonable plans. And then I tell other people that I'm going to do the unreasonable thing. And then I make myself accountable to them. And what I mean by that is like on Bound, I literally wrote a contract for the film. And I asked my sister and my father to sign it with me. And I basically said, like, this is what we're setting out to do. And we will complete it. And these are the parameters we're going to try to complete it under. And we won't stop until it's finished.
Did you do that at the start of it?
Yeah.
Or was that like, okay.
Yeah, it was. And actually, we reached a point. So my father's done a lot of project management professionally. And we reached a point in the project where my father used the term in project management, they call a death march, which is where the project is essentially growing beyond the capacity of the team to complete it. So the project's pace is outstripping your pace to keep up with it. And that was probably 4 years into working on Bound. And my father actually gave us the option to back out of the contract. That if you refund people that have invested, then I give you the option to essentially like shut it down. And I was too committed to people at that point. I mean, not only in the amount of time I worked on it, but like I signed a contract, I ran a Kickstarter, I took people's money. Like, So that's one of the things that I do to help keep myself accountable, because discipline will always win over motivation. Motivation comes and goes, but discipline doesn't have to, because discipline is a choice. Motivation is a feeling, right? It's emotion, but discipline is a choice. So clearly it's harder to be disciplined when you're unmotivated, but by creating those kind of external factors around me, right? Like other people that I'm accountable to, people that have invested. So there's funds that I need to be responsible with. That is a motivating factor. Like, no, I have a responsibility, not just to myself and how I feel on this project, but to these other people. I have responsibility to them, this greater group or team that's been involved with the project, to be faithful with what they've given me or what they've believed in me. So that's part of how I keep myself motivated on projects. And then having team members is really good, guys. Like just other people who are there with you, walking through the same thing that you're walking through, and you can kind of lean on each other when you're having bad days, and then you're helping pick somebody else up and you're having a great day. So that's perfect. So bound was just how long it was. I also find that like the harder the thing is, the harder I need to compensate. And what I mean by that is like when I was producing bound, I also did a lot of triathlon, including like a half Ironman. So that became an outlet for me, right? It's like I would go jump on my bike and do like 60-mile training rides. And it's like I can go to the studio and I can animate, and then I gotta get out of here. And so then I would go do something and like brutalize myself for 3 or 4 hours, and then come back and I'm like, all right, like I've worked off the energy, I've had a nice break. Like I feel like I accomplished something outside of the film. So like, that's a great training ride. Like, those are good numbers for me. And then come back in and be motivated to continue on the project. And then to Joshua's point earlier, taking some like little breaks along the way. We did a couple other creative projects during that. Those can be really helpful, because again, like you talked about earlier, Christian, just having something where like I finished it, like here's a completed product. And then on Wandering Skies so far, my biggest concern with Wandering Skies, but it's kind of twofold. One is, can we even fund this thing? If we can fund it, I believe we can create it. I mean, I do. If I didn't think that, I wouldn't take the funds from people. Well, we're not funded yet, so I wouldn't even ask for the funds from people if I didn't fully believe that we had the capacity to complete it. So that's one of them, is can we even fund this? And then the other one is is this a project even kind of worth making at the end of the day? And those are the two big questions for me, because I'm asking other people to go along with this, and I'm asking other people to go along with this on a scale that I haven't done before. So I need 17 people on my crew to produce the first season of Wandering Skies. I'm asking 17 people to come work for me, to trust me with their incomes, to trust me with their jobs. And your job affects every part of your life. Like, no matter what you say, 70-80% of your life is around your job for most people. So if your job sucks, your home life is going to suck. Like, that's how it works. If you're frustrated at your job, you're going to be frustrated at home. You can't like go home and in the 30% of your waking hours that you're not related to your job, like cleanse yourself of the 70% of your waking hours that you are. So I'm asking people to trust me with a lot, and that's a big responsibility. I think that the last 5.5 years in the Coast Guard and learning leadership there, and like actually being interested in people's lives, has definitely helped form some of those leadership qualities in me, where I feel more confident doing it with the team. So those are the two big concerns, and the way that I mostly address them. So I just try to really do my homework and think ahead and plan well, and get feedback from other people, either people who are more veteran in the field than I am, or outside of the field and can offer perspective in terms of when it comes to my plan, when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to my perspective, like, am I on the right track here? So just constantly try to check myself against other people. And that's part of how I address that question of, am I on the right path here? Am I being faithful with these funds? Am I being accountable to the people that I've either promised a product to or that I've taken investment from? And then in terms of whether or not we're telling the right story, man, I think that like that's like one of the bloody hardest things about making film. You don't really know if it worked until it's done. You don't really know. Like, you're hoping, right? And there's like a few people on your creative team, and they're giving you feedback on the process. But it's when you release it that you find out whether or not you did okay. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm spending years making this thing. I hope people like it, and then people are like, it kind of sucks, and you're like, well, right? So you're trying to get that feedback along the way, but you don't know if it's a story worth telling until you get it out there. So how do I address that question? Well, what I do is I Shark Tank my project, and what I mean by that is I find other people who have more experience than us, who can provide outside perspective, and I say, tell me everything that you like and don't like about this. And you give them your precious screenplay that you spent all this time working on, and you're like, shred this for me. And then they come back and they're like, I didn't understand this at all. This doesn't make any sense. Like, this character sucks, whatever it is. And then you get back like the tattered leftovers. And then you're like, all right, how do I make this better? And so we've already spent 2.5 years crafting this Wandering Skies. And along the way, we've had other people, authors, screenplay writers, story developers, looking at that project and saying like, this makes sense, this doesn't, I don't understand this part's amazing, whatever it is, right? And that's how we're answering that question, like, are we telling a story worth telling? Is all of this in the end worth it? And I think the answer is yes. And the way that you understand that it's yes is you surrender that project to other people to a degree. You're always its guardian, but maybe I should say you expose it. You expose the project to other people and you let them torment the project. And then you bring your like battered screenplay back into the fold. And then you're like, okay, how do we make this better, right? And exposure to pressure from the outside, that's what makes things stronger. And I mean, Pixar does this relentlessly on their projects, guys, like all the way through. They're relentlessly reviewing it. You can be a janitor at Pixar, walk into a storyboarding review session and be like, hey, I don't really understand this character's motivation. He doesn't make any sense to me. And like the storytellers have to be like, well, let's think about that, right? Like people have voice into it. So yeah, that's a long-winded way. So that's how I address like some of the current concerns on this project and how I've done it in the past in terms of like highs and lows.
Your story of having to give up your script to be shredded, it's much like Nemo, who had to go off on his own. If you love something, you have to let it go and let it be exposed to the elements. Yeah, that's oh, God, I have all these thoughts that come while you're talking and then they seem to go away once it's done. But oh yeah, I was gonna say, what I've heard even with like major motion pictures, that funded by these production companies, it's a miracle still that incredible movies are produced because there's so many things that go into it, so many things that can go wrong. But then you have these rare instances where everything just goes right and it creates this absolute masterpiece of a film that is universally acclaimed. And working on my film, I've been, again, the very conception of the story, happened, I guess you could argue, when I was, 15, but of Gray Horizon specifically, that was pre-COVID when I was working the story out, which is weird to say. It feels like a long time ago. But then I created the characters, I wrote the script, I rewrote the script. And then I held auditions, I recorded the voice actors, and now I am animating a story, just shot by shot, frame by frame, to follow along with the script and voice actors that I recorded like a year ago. And it's not like I've been rereading the story in that year of animation. It's like I'm really kind of flying by the seat of my pants, shooting it scene by scene, set by set. And it's like the story is insanely slowly again coming into vision. And I'm like, I have to have faith in my younger self that I told a good story and that I chose a good story to tell, that I made the right decisions with voice actors and recording. And so it's like all these different aged versions of me are all working together to make this thing happen. But I have to have faith in those other versions that they did a good job to begin with. And of course, other people are involved, but I feel like for all of our projects, they are kind of our brainchild, and there's a larger amount of just connection and responsibility to the project itself. But it's interesting to see how it comes alive in front of your own eyes. And that's one of the great joys of stop motion, I think.
Yeah. If I can, Christian, I think you said something in there that I would just push back on a little bit, and then I'll give you a couple of reasons why. You said that it's kind of a miracle that these things even worked out. There's definitely some truth to that, right? Like it's an absurdly complex process. I think that film is the highest art form we know because it's all the power of an orchestra. It's all the power of a novel. It's all the power of the theater. It's all the power of photography come to life. And then it's every one of these things that need to be seamlessly melded into one greater form. Like that's crazy. Like it's practically psychotic. But here's the thing. If you look at some companies like Pixar, Pixar has produced hit after hit after hit. If you look at companies like Marvel Studios, once they formed up after kind of the early days, hit after hit after hit, commercial success after commercial success. So maybe there's more formula and less miracle going on than we realized from the jump. And I think if you look to the way that Pixar produces stories, there's a ton of insight in that. First, they do it as a team, absolutely as a team. Secondly, the team and outside people from the core team get to brutalize the story over and over again. And think about like a sword being forged, right? You take a crude piece of metal that's worthless to anyone as a tool or a weapon at the start. But then as that blacksmith hammers that and it goes into the fire and into the water and onto the anvil and goes under the hammer stroke and back into the fire again and back to the anvil, you're beating out the impurities. You're shaping that into something worthwhile and beautiful in the end. So I think it's maybe less miraculous and more the approach of the craftsman in the process of producing it. And that you can then get, let's call it a run of successes like someone like Pixar or Marvel had, at least through the whole first and third phase, I think. So I would just push back on that a little bit and say that I think there is more science to the craft than we might give it credit for at first jump.
Mm-hmm. You make some good points, Greg. I guess that's in something, in hindsight, when I was I guess maybe in my early 20s, I got obsessed with the hero's journey. I read about it and learned about it. And I was like, oh my God, I started to see it everywhere. Like even in my day-to-day life and the smallest interactions, I was like, what's going on? This is literally, is this like at the core of existence? What is this? And I became like obsessed with the structure of it. Yeah. And then I was, planning on writing this movie. I was like, okay, I got to take this structure thing seriously. And really, it is fascinating when you dissect a lot of movies, the way that they're structured. And of course, there are, variations here and there, but obviously there are some stories and some story structures that have some kind of existential resonance that just works for us. And we love them, and it makes sense to us. And so I think, you're absolutely right. There are formulas that work. And that doesn't mean you have to like strictly adhere to, a play-by-play, but you can use this formula to your advantage to tell the story you want to tell, whether that's a plot formula or like structuring your team and putting your story through the fire. So I think it's a really good insight there. Yeah.
And I think it's worth throwing in here that, and this is a really good point you made earlier, Christian, about, you have to be kind to your younger self, and you also have to kind of trust your younger self, which is so hard to do. Like there are scenes in Bound, and Joshua, you talked about this with reanimating things. There are scenes that I in Bound, like, because you got to bear in mind, I'm 6 years better as a filmmaker by the time I'm finishing. I'm tens of thousands of frames of animation better than when I started. And so like there's that scene in the ghost town. I think it's like the fourth scene in the movie. No, fourth or fifth scene, something like that. They're in the ghost town, and like there's obviously a drop in quality in that scene because it was like the first thing that we did on that project. But I let it stay, and here's the reason that I let it stay. The project was already taking so long. At some point, you have to move forward and just know that your next project will be better. So there's this little line I heard years ago when I was first studying film that stuck with me. Films are never finished. They're just abandoned. And that's the truth, guys, because at any point in the process, you're like, I could do that better. This sound design needs to be better. These visual effects need to look better. Yes, and walk away.
Yeah.
Like, know when it's enough, abandon that project, walk away, and do it better on the next one. So like you bring up a great point there, Christian. Like you have to trust your younger self, and then at some point you have to say, you know what? It's good enough.
Yeah, but there's more to it too. You have to, like right now, I have to trust my younger self and I have to have faith in him. But you're talking about Bound earlier and how you're like, there's certain things you didn't do well or should have done better. You also have to be hard on your younger self once it's done and be like, okay, buddy, you could have done better. Here's where you messed up. Here's where my future self is going to do things differently. But then you also have to forgive your younger self because they were doing the best they could, probably. Well, I've taken up quite a bit of your guys' time and I really appreciate it, but I do have one more question that I just kind of want to ask, and it might be a little bit of an unusual one, but where would you guys like to see brick filming go? This is kind of a multi-parter. You can take whatever part you like and run with it. Where would you like to see brick filming go? Are there any niches or styles or even potentials for brick filming that you don't think have been fully realized? And on that note, what do you think the future might hold for the more adventurous brick filmers? Does anything come to mind with that question?
Well, I think Greg is doing something that's on the scale of like the biggest of the biggest you could hope for with brick filming. But yeah, I think if that comes through, that's like the peak of what it can be. I mean, it's Lego, so like you can't have a studio, or you could, but studios aren't going to pick it up and make like feature films out of it. Lego can make feature films out of it, but like an independent, sort of independent, you know, TV show or film, like what he's doing is definitely, I'd say, the top of where it can be, like where you actually have production designers and composers, sound designers, and animators, and like a real film, the whole crew working on it as if it wasn't like that. So yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you. What I'll do, Christian, is I'll tell you what is currently my like 10-year vision for Monitogo Studios. What I've identified for a long time in the film industry, and even more so in the independent film industry, is that it's very hard for people to do this long term, because film is often gig work, and gig work is hard to sustain, right? Because if you want to have a family, you know, a spouse, children, like down the road, you're going to need more stability in your life. You're going to have regular income for them. There's medical bills, you know, there's like, you can't, gig work is really hard to do long term and make that sustainable, which is why a lot of people leave filmmaking. So they get into it, they get some experience, and then they're like, oh, I can't make a real living at this. And so they leave. So my 10-year vision with Monitogo Studios is to produce like a micro version of Pixar. And I imagine that probably capping out around 30 to 50 full-time people. But the objective is that we produce shows and movies that are all under the same studio banner, and that people work for the studio as full-time employees. So they're salaried down the road. I want there to be benefits for people. Like that will be their job, that will be their career. And you'll come to work as an animator, and you'll be an animator who works on that project and then works on the next project and then works on the project after that. And so as one project is out there and it's in the marketplace and hopefully being monetarily and critically successful, and then the benefits, right, from that project are coming back into the studio, then that's what's funding movement into the next project, and so on and so forth. So Pixar's like, people work at Pixar for 25 years, guys. Like meeting Angus yesterday, he's been at Pixar for 25 years. He was there working on A Bug's Life years and years ago, and now he's just directed Lightyear, right? So he's spent 2.5 decades honing his skills with that team. You can't do that with gig workers. And gig workers have a hard time being sustainable in that space. So my long-term vision is to produce a studio where people have full-time jobs, and Wandering Skies is the first major venture into that. So I need like 17 people for the first season, like I said. So that's like the start, right? Start small, and then you grow as you get the maturity and the structure and the means to do so. With the vision, you know, in 10 years that we have a studio where people, that's their job, that's their life, they live there, they stay in that community, they come to Monitogo Studios every day for work, and we produce projects that are large in scale, that are commercial pursuits, and then the skills and the visions of those team members grow more and more. Ultimately, I would love to be like a tiny little version of Ed Catmull, he's the CEO of Pixar, where I'm not even making these films, like better directors than me, better storyboard artists than me, better animators than me, they're the ones making it. And I can maybe just be like the warden of a fortress that protects the environment where all those artists can do their best work. So like right now, got to fill a lot of roles. When you build things, you have to do that. But I'd like to get to the point where like, dude, my name's not even on those movies anymore, man. Like I'll take a step back. Some of those other people, like a better, like, you know, I don't know, maybe Joshua is working with us one day, and that would be sick. And like Vennetti is the one whose name is the director of that movie. Like, I'm gonna be on the cover. Like, let me just build the environment where better artists than me can do their best work, and that's their job. And so that there's security and stability in that environment, and we produce, you know, Hollywood level commercial projects that appeal to a large audience, that give people a profession in the craft of film. And I would like that to be stop motion as a medium. And so that's a long-term vision. That's what I'm fighting for. And you know,
That's beautiful, man. That fires me up. I would love to see that happen. I think it's and I think if anybody could make it happen, it's you. Just, you know, looking at your track record and the way that you're setting yourself up in a scalable way, it's really inspiring. And it's just the degree to which you take this filmmaking medium seriously. You know, not everybody like shares that same viewpoint. There are certainly lots of people, even brick filmers, who are like, you know, it's just this kind of fun, light thing. But of course, it is just a medium, and you know. I've still got I'm gonna have your Sistine Chapel comment in my head for a while, I think. It might be a little bit of a bad look, but as the host, I guess I'd say, but I do want to share a little bit of my 10-year vision as well, because it is certainly unusual. But you know, it's kind of started, but you know, what we were talking about earlier, you said you've plotted out, you know, 4 seasons of Wandering Skies, and I've thought through a trilogy of movies, with Great Horizons being the first one that tells a story that revolves around 3 major characters. And I am truly obsessed with it, and I think about it all the time, and I get so excited. I have these emotional responses when I have like an aha moment of what a character is going to do, or what their journey will be, or how it will end. And I can't tell anybody, I can't share it, and certainly can't share it in the way I see it in my head. But this whole endeavor is, you know, embarking on the endeavor of trying to make that happen eventually. So in 10 years, what I'd love to do is create a brick-built cinematic universe, you know, something that exists in the hearts and minds of, you know, hopefully lots of fans. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with my channel, but I've held contests that take place in my universe too. So there's it kind of has been fan built, and we have lots of fan expanded lore to the series. So it's a weird thing, and you know, I think it's something that hasn't been done a ton yet, because like we've talked about, long form brick filming is a weird and hard and time consuming thing. But it's just something that I just have become obsessed with. So I'm curious to see what kind of success can be had in creating a brick, and obviously Wandering Skies, that would be a cinematic universe in its own right. And you've had to make an entire world to tell a single story. So it's like, why wouldn't you run with that world and, you know, expand it as much as possible?
We hope, I'll just amplify that for 1 second, which is, we hope that as we spend all this time kind of developing and building all these guidelines for this world, that we create something in which other people are invited to come in and play. So like, Christian, maybe we have very different world from you, but like, let's say you looked at Wandering Skies and you're like, you know what, I have an awesome idea for a short film that would take place in Wandering Skies. You could do it. Yeah. Like, you could be like, there's enough of this world that I can see here to know how to play and create in the same space. So yeah. And I think that, honestly, for all its disadvantages, perhaps one of the great advantages to telling incredible stories through brick filming and building a universe through brick filming is Lego bricks are inherently built to play with and interact with. And so there's a potential there for wider engagement and interaction that you might not have. I guess you could, you know, make action figures for your live action movie, but there's something about Lego that sets it apart, I'd say. Well, guys, I think that's a good note to end on. I am so appreciative of your time. I know you're both busy guys, obviously, and have plenty on your plates. But I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy listening to this. Christian, thank you for putting this together and for inviting us. We really appreciate that as well. And I hope we gave listeners something useful.
Oh, I think so.
Thank you.
Of course. Take care, guys.